we've seen the international guys come here, you know, H&M, Zara, Uniqlo, Forever 21, Mr. Price is on the way, Pepcor being bought out by Steinhoff, who own Freedom, and, you know, Harris Scarf, and just recently TJ's buying forgot the name of it, Trade Secret. And they're all larger format stores. So how are the Aussies responding to that? How are the traditional Aussie retailers responding to that significant megatrend?
Well, I think the response has been to date that a number of the Australian retailers are also looking at large formats. I mean, the one that probably pioneered first as a fashion retailer is probably Cotton On with their mega stores, and they've been very successful in rolling those store formats out. And I think you're now seeing a number of other Australians who were talking about Rockmans before. Whilst I haven't seen that particular example, I know it was in a Stockland centre, where they're looking to take larger formats to try and I guess compete in some regards with these international retailers. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily going to work when you're merging a number of brands into a large box. I think Cotton On, it's worked because it had a very strong retailer brand as well. So, and I think the big question too is then whether or not you're actually going to drive increased productivity out of those stores. What we're seeing with the big international minimajors and number of the numbers, and Darryl probably does want to comment on H&M at the GPO, but some of the figures that we're hearing that the international retailers are doing are phenomenal. So, but that's because they've got a product that's appealing to the customers. So I think it's really working out very much as Darryl was talking about, what do the customers want, and how can you best deliver that in the right retail format, as opposed to thinking big is best.
Darryl, this is Dorothy Dixon, but I guess you're happy with H&M at the GPO?
Just a touch pleased, yes.
Totally.
But to be fair...
They told me Glasshouse is going to outperform it, just so you know.
Okay. Well, good luck to you, but as we know, it does come at the expense of another retailer, so that's the challenge. It's not, it's not more to go around, it's at the expense of some.
100%. Pete, my daughter goes on ASOS online. She spent, I think it was 400 and something British pounds on the dress for a formal. It showed up last week. She didn't like it. She sent it back, and you'd be very pleased to know she bought her formal dress from Myer at Hornsby. Thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you.
You'd be happy to hear it. So the reason why I raise that, digital is, often the statement is digital is not always about transacting, but at the end of the day, it is about transacting, because if there's no transactions, there's no business. And, so my question to you is, what real impact is digital having on the mix of shops in an Australian shopping centre today? What is it seriously doing to the mix of retailers?
Well, I think if you look at the mix of retail, what we're seeing is that we're seeing, from a shopping centre point of view, we're trying to make sure that we have food, fashion, leisure, entertainment and services basically all under one roof. And I think that what digital has done and what we're trying to look at is to use digital to ease the friction between the shopper and the retailer. I think what we're seeing though is we're seeing digital being able to influence the type of retailers coming into the centres in terms of the internationalisation, as you said earlier with Sue, in terms of the Australian consumer is certainly a well-travelled consumer, understands the retail brands globally, and there's an expectation that those brands are here physically as well as digitally. And I think that what that allows us as shopping centre owners and operators and investors is the fact that we do have the competition for space, and we've got to ensure that we have the right, we curate the right retailers for that space.
And in terms of allocation of floor space, what are you seeing, and this is a question I suppose to the entire panel, what are you seeing about the allocation of floor space, particularly as the Australian population ages and there is clearly an increasing demand for services and product to meet an ageing demographic? How have you seen that play out in the centres and the mix of shops?
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things when you look at shopping centres, 10, 15 years ago, the whole focus really was on fashion.
Totally.
Okay,
yeah.
And it's quite interesting if you look at the statistic, roughly the Australian consumer household typically spends the same amount on eating out as they do on fashion. And so what we're seeing in terms of the change of mix is introducing a lot more food catering into our centres. And whilst we've made a number of mistakes, for example, at Westfield Sydney, having restaurants where people exit the restaurant at night into an empty mall does not work. So therefore you need to ensure that you have that right environment for people to be able to exit into a pleasant environment. But if we're able to cater for that, I think that we're seeing an introduction and an increasing amount of food into our centres. The other thing from a service point of view is really, as Darryl said, is looking at healthcare. I think that when you look at the introduction of services, particularly health and childcare, that's something which we have to be part of the whole ecosystem as far as a family's life within our centres. And I think that our centres really are trying to be the town centre of old, and really providing those experiences for people from when they're born basically all the way through to when they pass away, and therefore being able to provide those type of services is important.
And each of you talked about, in one way, shape or form, consumers being a lot more active and having a voice. And Darryl, how are you seeing that shape, the future in terms of, for example, social justice, anti-sugar, anti-carbohydrate, environmental sustainability, don't tear down the ancient forests in South America, whatever it may be, and how are you seeing that play out in the shopping centres?
I think we've actually only seen the tip of the iceberg with this. I think it'll come at us from two ways. There's the activism out of things like the super funds, where we're already seeing many investors starting to exert their influence over things like coal and other influences. But I think it's more being driven by the younger generations, and they do have a social conscience. I mean, talk to anyone that's in a law firm or an accounting firm when they're doing the graduate induction, and they're not being asked about where is my career. It's all about what are your values, what do you stand for, who are your clients, who might I have to work for, do I have to work for one of these bad crowds? So I think that'll manifest itself in the shopping centres, and the mix, I think, will have to adapt. I think what will happen is the cycles of change will be very, very, very short. And I think the technology has enabled that to happen. So a retailer that you might have signed on for, 3 years or maybe 5 at a stretch and thought, see how they go, I think you'll see that cycle come down, and if they don't gain their foothold, they'll be out of business so quick it won't be funny. And I think most of us are dealing with the big multinationals. Most of them have got break clauses. We've already seen a couple come to the market and exit fairly quickly, and certainly throughout Europe and America, shorter terms are the day. So I think we've got a long, long way to go with this, and particularly on some of these real, life-threatening ones, sugar being the new fat. But I did watch a documentary, and they said, well, they had to take the fat out of the food and they just shoved sugar in to give it some taste. But, who knows where this ends, but I think it's got a long way to go.
Excellent. Colleagues, don't forget, text in a question or anything you want to raise. It says on here, text, I don't know what this means, text TPC15 to 61 427 541 357. Once to join, then text your message. I hope you understood that. So, Susie, Australia is so diverse today, more than ever. I mean, I think back to when I was a kid 60 years ago. I know, yeah. The other week I was at, I always go to Peter's Centre at Hornsby because it's up the road, and we love Hornsby, actually. You're doing a great job there, by the way, with the changes. And I had my 5-year-old and my 8-year-old with me, and the lady's checking the stuff out at Woolworths, and she says to me, "You've got lovely grandchildren." What are you going to say? I mean, So, Suze, years ago when you and I started as centre managers, we had shopping centres, and you do the demographic trade area work, and it was all quite white Caucasian and fairly predictable. You look at Sydney today, and certainly that's not the case, and it's heading in a very, very different direction, and this cultural diversity is clearly creating significant opportunity for all of us. And can you just talk a bit about how you're seeing that and how it reads through into the mix, the shopping centres, and kind of how we're responding?
Yeah, and I think that's the key term, is the opportunity that's actually creating. And to give one of your centres a plug, not that you've plugged a Mirvac centre yet, but a Westfield centre, Marylands, if you look at the diversity that in that community and how the retail mix has addressed that, and we're seeing the same. We have a centre in Rhodes, and it went from one census to the next census to having a 35% Asian demographic to something like a 46 or 47% Asian demographic. And we have remixed that centre, and we're still doing the next stage of it. And we have, without increasing the GLA, we've actually doubled the food and beverage offer and created a nighttime economy there, which previously wasn't existing. I mean, it's an incredibly densely populated part of Sydney, very vertical, smaller apartment sizes, the need for people to get out and to socialise. And we have retailers that are trading there 7 days a week to 11 o'clock at night. Serve chocolate, food, Max Bremer, all of those type of retailers. And I think it's really, as we said, like big data teaches us that looking at the consumer, it's about the sum of one and then trying to work out how many 1 + 1 + 1 actually make up your trade area. And I think the consumer, and going back to some of the activism too, I think, as we said, consumers are getting a little bit sick and tired of the same sort of offer that you're getting at shopping centres as well. And I think also the other important thing is, given as we urbanise more, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne and the Gold Coast, I mean, it's amazing when you look at how many vertical apartments here in the Gold Coast, that people are looking to get outside and to embrace the external environment a lot more. So, if you look sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago when we were starting out, 25 years ago, maybe 30, they were very internal focused boxes, and the biggest sort of frontage on was probably the docks into the streets, and now there's this whole approach, and every one of us is looking at it, as to how you actually break open some of those older retail formats and how you actually try and create a bit of a high street ambient feel at your front door. So it's sort of a bit like Peter was saying, it's different, but it's the same. And when we're going back to some of the old sort of adages, I mean, the Lend-Lease where I started my career, Casuarina, which you're obviously centre manager of, one of the things they put in there was a chapel so that people could get married, and to try and create this community and urban hub in Casuarina and Darwin, of all places. And you look at what we've sort of done in London with creating this amazing centre court area where they can hold the proms, the BBC proms. You can do film launches, so it's a real competition to the West End. So we're all looking at ways that we can actually create something a little bit different for the communities that we live in. And I think consumers will not accept the continuation of samenism. And I think that goes to, again, how big is the rollout of international retailers. And I think that's one of the things about food and beverage, is that really there has been a lot of innovation and creativity in that area. And I think that's what's actually driving a lot of the sales, because we haven't seen a lot of innovation generally in fashion per se. I mean, fashion really hasn't changed over the years as great as it used to. So food, I know it's a well-used term, but food is the new fashion, and it's really blended to the various communities with the retail assets that we work in.
And if you think about what you were just saying, not just in terms of ethnic diversity, gender diversity, physical diversity, diversity is a critical issue for the future of the country. Daryl, how is that reading through to the creation of teams of people in designing, creating and delivering outstanding retail centres into the future?
I think it gets back to know your customer, and this is where the data does become important, I think. And it's a bit like that theme of the Mad Men. There was just a thing of assumption that the expert knew it all. I think what technology and really active consumers have allowed is they will express their opinion. I mean, we all do focus groups and all sorts of things. The challenge is to make sure you're listening to the right groups, asking the right questions, checking, rechecking. I think the point I was trying to make with the .com boom was that, I can remember someone saying everything will be bought on a procurement portal, and the world of direct transactions is over, but clearly that's not the case. And I think equally with shopping centres and anything we're doing in property is to make sure that we do understand demand, how deep it is, how long it might last, because you can go in the wrong place and be there too early, as many people have found. And I think if we can have a reasonably flexible model, and it does get back to, I forget who it was, talking about the anchors. You know, the old days if you just whacked a couple of big boxes up each end, slap a few retailers in the middle, and you had a bit of a shooting gallery of, you know, trying to part the consumer from their money. It's a very much more sophisticated model today. And so a lot of what we do is to try and get the right brief and then execute very, very well. And, you know, we're glad we're working with Peter and the like, because they are very good at it. And the customer is very discerning.
So